Ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to Evolving Consciousness. I'm your host Purushottam, and in today's video, we are going to talk about the revelation, the secret to eternal peace and unlimited freedom, the secret to unlimited reservoir of power and true strength. Now, you might be thinking I talked about such lofty virtues and adjectives, but what am I going to talk about in today's video? Today's video, we are going to sort of understand what being a Sthitaprajna means. Sthitaprajna is a word in Sanskrit which means, if you want to break it down, Sthitaprajna, prajna essentially means awareness, and sthita means to be steady, to be in steady awareness. Now you might be thinking, what is this all about? Sthitaprajna is basically a state where a person is always steadfast and is always connected to his eternal self. A Sthitaprajna is a person who is always established in his self, and he is someone who is considered to be a true source of power, a person who can influence people effortlessly. Now, this condition of Sthitaprajna, the state of Sthitaprajna, was talked about in great detail in one of the most famous books modern civilization has ever witnessed. I am talking about the Holy Bhagavad Gita. Now, Bhagavad Gita is such a powerful book that it is sort of an amalgamation of all the spiritual philosophies any person can ever be exposed to. And all the answers for any kind of an excruciating question any human being has is available in that book. Specifically, if one wants to start reading the Bhagavad Gita, the chapter number 2, which is called Contents of the Gita Summarized, it's sort of a summary, a quick summary of the entire content of the Bhagavad Gita. And in this conversational style of talking in the Bhagavad Gita, it's all about a conversation between Arjuna and Krishna. Arjuna asks Lord Krishna, what does it mean to be a Sthitaprajna? Now, you might be thinking, why are we even bothered? I mean, what is it for you and me in becoming a Sthitaprajna? Now, I'm going to give you some real life names of people who qualify the requirements of what it means to be a Sthitaprajna. If you consider Mr. Ratan Tata, Mahendra Singh Dhoni, Nelson Mandela, Mahatma Gandhi, or Mother Teresa, these are all examples of what it means to be a Sthitaprajna. A person who is always equipoised, a person who is always established in a sense of serenity, in a sense of eternal calm. No matter what kind of chaos is happening around them, they are always established in their senses. Their actions are not impulsive. Their actions are spontaneously the right actions. They are not impulsive based on the reactions. They don't have temperament based reactions. Now, there are countless. If you read the history, if you read the life of these legends which I just talked, you will completely understand what being a Sthitaprajna is. There is a video which I made on Mr. Ratan Tata where I had quoted an example as to how Mr. Ratan Tata completely changes the way he perceives insults, the way he doesn't allow his inner calm and inner stability to be affected by the outside. In the second chapter, Arjuna asks Lord Krishna as to what are the qualities of Sthitaprajna, how does he eat, how does he walk, how does he conduct himself throughout the day. And Krishna starts revealing to Arjuna what it means to be a Sthitaprajna. Now, when I talked about this concept of someone who is truly free, what did I mean by that? Now, if you want to understand true freedom, what is true freedom, right? Now, it's going to be a little deep, and I want your absolutely undivided attention to sort of understand what I'm trying to say. Freedom essentially means when you are unperturbed by what's happening around you. That is true freedom, isn't it? Otherwise, we are always slave to the outside world. If something happens the way we want it, we feel great, we feel happy, we feel ecstatic. But if something doesn't happen the way we perceive or the story through which we want it to happen, we suddenly feel remorse and we feel depressed. Now, you might be thinking this is the natural way to live. But is this natural way of living serving us? To the contrary, you will realize this, that this kind of way of functioning, right? This is the prime reason of all the mental diseases which humanity is sort of infected with. And the funny thing is, right, many people seek escape routes. They sort of tend to gratify their senses, or they divert their attention into doing something which they find enjoyable. Now, there's nothing wrong in that. But are we solving the root problem here? But are we trying to hide away from the problem? It's like saying that, let's understand this from a very beautiful example. Now, there is a bird which sort of puts his head under the ground to sort of think that he sort of is safe from the danger of approaching carnivore. Let's say there's a bird, you probably have heard of that bird, who sort of hides his head under the pile of mud. It thinks that it's sort of avoiding the pain by not seeing that approaching danger. This is how we all are functioning. We tend to distract ourselves by doing something which is pleasurable to the senses. Now, the reason I am telling this is, the prime reason of all addictions and all bad habits is because we are not able to handle the chaos in the world. We are not able to handle the ups and downs of life. And that is the reason when we sort of indulge in all the bad addictive habits which we shouldn't engage in, and we know deep within that this is not going to be beneficial to us, but we still engage in that. Now, coming back to our topic of Sthitaprajna. Now, being Sthitaprajna not only makes you a powerful personality from within, but also it sort of safeguards you from falling trap to these addictive tendencies, or to create more mess out of an already messed out life. Because oftentimes, if you study the trajectory of people who commit suicides, or people who are into gross depression, you will realize one very interesting thing. Something happens in their life because of which they become completely remorse, and they sort of take up things which will give them immediate relief, things which will make them, the things which will sort of help them to experience that inner calm and sort of give them a momentary relief from that suffering. But what they fail to understand and acknowledge is, they are just moving from one prison to another prison. They are not completely liberated from the prison, because essentially the prison is never outside. The prison is inside our very mind, in our very own consciousness. Hence, it's not a luxury to be a Sthitaprajna. Even if you want to be safe from all these bad tendencies, Sthitaprajna is an absolute requirement which we all should, in some point of our life, start endeavoring towards cultivating this consciousness of being a Sthitaprajna. Now, Lord Krishna talks about this, and he says that a Sthitaprajna person is not affected by what's happening on the outside. Whether there's something great in his life, sure, he is happy. Now, this doesn't mean to say that the person should become absolutely insensitive and dry. No, that's not what that's not what Lord Krishna is talking about. We always need to understand this particular knowledge of Bhagavad Gita in the right context. Lord Krishna is talking about these extreme manifestations which we all indulge in. He says that a person who is not sort of slave of his sensory enjoyments, of his sensory gratifications, he is the person who qualifies to be called a Sthitaprajna. Now, you might be thinking, what does this does that mean we shouldn't enjoy life, or does that mean we shouldn't engage in sense gratification? No, that's not the point. But essentially, when we consider those things as our escape routes, those very things prison us in a different prison. We are trying to avoid the suffering through these sense gratifications. We do feel a temporary relief, but the temporary relief makes us a slave of those substances or those particular things which we are finding an escape from. We become a slave to that. Also, one very important point here to note is Being a Sthitaprajna, Lord Krishna says that such a person should have sense regulation, should not excessively enjoy through his senses. Now, this is a very interesting thing, right? And in the ancient age, or if you just observe our history, if you wanted to sort of destroy a king and completely finish him and his kingdom, there was a very clever strategy which the opponents used to employ. What they used to do is, they used to train certain class of females. They were called the Vishakanya. And the entire purpose of a Vishakanya was to entice the king. And those days, it was said that the king who has a loose character, who is lusty by nature, army is not needed to completely destroy this person. Because army and a lot of warfare requires a lot of infrastructure. And the wise kings knew the weakness of these lusty kings. And they used to send these Vishakanyas to entice the king. And that Vishakanya, they used to be trained to seduce. They used to be very proficient in the art of seduction. And through their seduction, they used to assassinate the kings, and huge empires would collapse. Now, why did I bring up this particular example? Chanakya beautifully said that women are probably the reason for a man's impediment, a man to perish, right? But one thing to note and one thing to properly understand, it's not that women are the reason for a man's peril or for the man's complete loss or colossal damage, but it's essentially the lust which a man has towards a woman. This is something which needs attention. The reason why those kings were assassinated was because they were slaves to the lust. They were slaves to their senses, and because of that, the opponents could take advantage of the weakness of this man. Hence, it's very important that if you don't want to be taken advantage of by people, because let's understand, the only way you can be taken advantage of is when the other person is aware of your weak tendencies or your weak qualities. Hence, it's very important. Even Lord Krishna talked about it. When he talks about sense regulation, he's not saying that we should completely disregard the sense enjoyment aspect. Sure, if you are sort of endeavoring for a higher spiritual consciousness, that is probably an indispensable requirement. But people who are from normal walk of life, they should understand regulation is the key. Regulation is the key to sort of achieve the state of Sthitaprajna. Also, Lord Krishna talks about this aspect that when a person who doesn't have a lot of obsessive desires to gratify his senses, he is a person who is capable of establishing in the self. There are people out there who cry at the drop of a pin, and they get happy at the drop of a second. These people have a very poor state of mind, though they might seem to be ecstatic and happy on the outside, but internally their consciousness is always bleeding. Because a person who's truly happy, he doesn't cry at the drop of a hat. A person who's truly established in the self, bad and good are at the same pedestal for such a person. Now, you might be thinking this is sort of a trait of a yogi, but I also gave out names of people who are from ordinary walks of life. Now, Ratan Tata is not a spiritualist. Mahendra Singh Dhoni is not a spiritualist. But these people, probably because of their natural tendencies, they naturally are Sthitaprajna. But that doesn't mean you and me cannot endeavor to develop these qualities. Because being a Sthitaprajna not only helps you in your spiritual goals, but also to become productive and effective in your material dimension. In one of my videos, I talked about the greatest treasure, and the greatest treasure is true serenity. The greatest treasure any human being can have is true calmness, a calmness which is unconditional, a happiness which is unconditional. And in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna talks about it in excruciating detail. And when I talk about this cutting down this dependence on sense gratification, that is the first step to build and sort of have this tendency of Sthitaprajna. Also, one very important aspect and a very practical aspect is not everyone can cut out the senses and senses enjoyment, right? To sort of have this aim to completely be devoid of sensory gratification, that is an impractical aim. But what we should do, and Lord Krishna talks about that, instead of engaging in lower tastes, we should develop a higher taste. Now you might be thinking, what does higher taste mean? Higher taste can mean different for different people. Higher taste, from a spiritualist standpoint, it can mean cultivating spiritual practices, cultivating devotion towards God. Now essentially what you're doing is you're diverting your senses to experience a pleasure which is of a higher category. It is not a pleasure of the lower senses which sort of give you a sort of lower vibe of high, right? It gives you a temporary sense of high, but essentially it's also making you addicted. And this is not something which is good for our body and mind. And when you cultivate a higher taste, these lower tastes automatically drop. Now this higher taste can mean so many things to different people. You probably can invest your energy to build upon a new skill, to learn a particular aspect, or develop a particular skill. Now it's all about the diversion of energy. Now I want to talk about another subtle dimension here. When we talk about reducing the sensory gratifications, it's also exercising our own willpower, exercising the muscles of our own willpower. And the more you exercise a particular muscle, the stronger it grows. I hope my today's message was granular and it made a lot of sense to you, especially the example of Vishakanya and the kings, which sort of perished because they could not withstand the enticing moves of those Vishakanyas, probably gave you a lot of perspective. Now this is one example. There can be countless different examples as to how distractions sort of lure us and completely destroy us from within. Also the fact, and there might also be a school of thought which says that all this can be done in moderation. But the funny thing is, when calamity strikes us or when some colossal tragedy strikes us, we tend to do these things in excess because it gives us a lot of pleasure, and we feel that when we engage in these kind of activities, we are escaping the suffering. But neurochemistry and neuroscience says that the dopamine levels in your brain, the more you become an addict to these activities, the dopamine fluctuates to abnormal levels. The highs and lows which you experience are grave. Hence, it's very important to ponder and contemplate on our own well-being, because not only do we want to become a Sthitaprajna, but also we want to live a productive, happy and fulfilled life. Thank you so much for your time on my video. I hope my today's video brought a lot of sense to you and brought a sort of a commitment, a sort of a desire to endeavor towards becoming a Sthitaprajna. And this is a journey of a lifetime. So we all are a work in progress. At least we are aware of this particular knowledge. Now you might also be thinking that how do we succeed in becoming a Sthitaprajna? It's as simple as riding a bicycle. Now I'm sure most of you know how to ride a bicycle. It's surprising to note that there are few people who don't know how to ride a bicycle. But in either ways, if you know how to run a bicycle, how to balance a bicycle, probably you know how to even become a Sthitaprajna. Now there is not going to be a one-day fix recipe, right? This is not a one-day fix formula. It's a practice of a lifetime. And you are always going to fail multiple times. But the key to this is constant practice. Constant practice with a sense of commitment, a sense of patience and a sense of detachment. And not with a sense of frustration, right? That I'm not becoming a Sthitaprajna. We need to be patient with ourselves. We know our goal and we are going to fail countless times. But the key here is perseverance and the key here is also patience. So I hope my today's video incited a spark within you to become a Sthitaprajna. And also, if you want to understand more in detail, you can always go through the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, which is titled Contents of the Gita Summarized. Thank you so much for your time on my video. I am really grateful for your time on my video, and if you like the contents of today's video, don't forget to share it with a couple of your friends. Also, don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you are enjoying the genre of the content I am sharing on my channel. Thank you so much, and I will meet you in the next video. Bye.